So, I pray that these subjects will guide you in your search for truth. First quote I'm going to start off with is, history is the polemics of the victor. Polemics, I had to look that word up, but it's basically controversial speech. And so, obviously history is written by those who've won. And we need to keep that subject in mind for this entire presentation, is that this is the narrative that historians and those who have commanded historians to write books and write our history books and textbooks in high school and so forth, to push that narrative forward. There are certain other narratives that lots of movies and documentaries that we're seeing these days are exposing and revealing, and it feels kind of depressing because all this is coming out now, and we're like, why is it now that we're all of a sudden get all the backlash? Well, because all of the rest of history in the past centuries, all the bad narrative has been kind of suppressed. So we've been hearing the good stuff, and now everyone has the power to publish their own documentaries, their own books, whatever on Amazon, and everyone is hearing kind of the backstory. No, actually it's this. No, actually child labor in China. Oh, actually it's this. Actually this is really what's going on. And so I think we're dealing with a very potentially depressing time period for many people because so much is being unearthed. But yet, the polemics is controversial speech. This is why Mr. Buckley Jr. says it, is that it's being able to use history in itself as an argument in your own favor. And so the history books themselves will speak more favorably towards those that wrote them. Alas, the entire map of the world is written with Europe and North America on the top side of a sphere that has no up. Right? There's a famous map that has South Africa at the top of a map. Just because you are the dominant power doesn't mean that the Earth is rotated favorably towards your direction, right? So, now, quick game here before we get started. By the way, who here thinks that America is a Christian nation and ruled under Christ? Okay. Hey, what's up, Alex? Welcome. Find a spot with the apple, either here up front or in the back there. And by the way, for Cameron, there was no one that raised their hand on that. Although Christ is sovereign over everything, Christ isn't necessarily ahead of our government. Who knows what AD stands for?
It's Latin.
Close. You got the second one. Anno, just A-N-N-O, anno, and then dominate or dominus. Dominus is Latin for leader or lord or ruler, and anno, did anyone go on the Europe trip recently? Oh, okay. But anno is the word Latin for year, and so anno domine is the year of our Lord. That's our first one. So you can guess which religion is associated with that one. Christian. All right, CE, who knows that one? Common Era, boom, boom, boom. And the previous one is BCE, which they just stole from BC, before Christ. Which religion would that represent?
Postmodern.
Yeah, postmodern, atheist, secular movement. What about AM? These are a little bit trickier. AM and AL. If you know this, that's like major historical brownie points, but.
No, I already talked about it.
Do you remember? Do you remember?
Oh, I don't think I remember now.
Okay,
But I know the
no
religions they tie to, but
okay.
I don't remember the letters.
This one, AM, is Anno Mundi, which is the year after creation, or year of the earth. And Anno, or AL is Anno Lucis, is the year of the light. Lucis, the same place we get lux, and Lucifer is the word for light. And that's in the Freemasonic tradition. So this is just our first start. You'll start to see these two in very obscure places, but the more you see it, the more you start, you're like, oh, AM, AL, oh, I know what that means. What's fascinating about these two is that these two don't point back to Christ, per se. Because for the Jews, he wasn't the Messiah. And for the Freemasons, they follow the Jewish tradition. And so they both go back to 4,000, just like Christians do. We all go back in the Judeo-Christian calendar to roughly 4,000 BC based on the genealogy in the Bible. The Freemasons just simply said, you know what, you're zero, we'll just deduct 4,000 or add that to our modern number. So today's day would be 6,023. For the Jews, it's a little more specific. I forget what the, here it's 3,761 is their calculated number that they go back to. And so you add that to 2023 and you get 5,784 AM Anno Mundi. We have 2023 and 2023 AD. And then of course this one is the only outlier amongst those four if you put it in that context of the 13.8 billion. Now, in 1492,
Columbus sailed the ocean blue.
In 1493, Columbus stole all that he could see. We just had Columbus Day a little bit ago. I had originally, which nationality did y'all originally think Columbus was? Spanish. Yeah, Spanish. I didn't know, but you thought Italian? So he was born, I believe, in Genoa, Italy. And so he's actually Italian. That's why when Giovanni and our friends went to Chicago, they went to celebrate Columbus as Italians. And I just thought, oh, that's fascinating. But this is just a little bunny trail side thing, is that a little known fact is that historians use Columbus to divide the past into epochs, making the Americas before 1492 pre-Columbian, and after that is like post-Columbian or whatever. But that exploratory route, which is where this map over here of Amsterdam comes into play a little bit, that age of exploration and colonization was so major that they decided Columbus to be that staple-head figure for that, even for a time-based perspective. That pre-1492 was pre-Columbian. Here are a couple Wikipedia pull-ups of each of those time stamps: Anno Mundi, Anno Domini, Anno Lucis, and each of these agree to that 4,000 year roughly historical narrative. Here you'll see that number, 5,961, 5,664. What number would this be in our Anno Domini system?
1918.
Yeah, 1918 or 1916. Yeah. No, you're good. Yeah, you're good. Yeah, 1916. So they'll sometimes translate it, and they'll have that same number, but then in the translation of their own version on cornerstones, on gravestones, on those kinds of things. So here we have our timeline, and if we go with the Judeo-Christian, even Masonic tradition as being a 4,000 BC, let's go back to some of the basics of our biblical history. The writing of the Torah, which is the first 5 books of what we call the Old Testament. The Jews, by the way, don't call the Old Testament the Old Testament because to them there's no New Testament. It's the Torah, and then the books that follow. So it's 3rd century BC, before Christ, is what I'm going to use to follow here forward. The Pentateuch, and then this goes on. This is a really, really fascinating book here on the table. It's the infographic Bible. If anyone ever sees this one, it is one of the most amazing publications I've ever seen, ever, with the amount of data that they have on the Bible and the accounts within it, and Scripture, how much of Scripture points to God under this name, how much of Scripture points to Jesus with that title, and it just goes on and on and on and on. The Torah was written, and it was detailing Genesis and all the accounts that we describe as giving us our basis for our 4,000 year history. In front of you, you each have an apple, and this is, feel free to take a bite from it whenever you want. I'll take a bite from it as well. Since we are already in a Christian tradition, believe that we are in the fall. We are going to recognize the symbolism of this event throughout culture and what it did. So this is Genesis 3, straight out of my Bible right there. And it talks about the serpent. It talks about the serpent deceiving Eve, the woman. And it says in verse 4, sorry, let's go to verse 3. But God did say, you must not eat the fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die. You will not surely die, the serpent said to the woman, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. That right there is in large part the basis for Gnosticism, which is different from agnosticism. And some of y'all, we've talked about these things before, and so y'all know bits and pieces of this thing, but this is hopefully going to tie the whole narrative all together. Gnosticism comes from the Greek word gnosis, which means knowledge. Agnosis, the alpha prefix before the word gnosis, makes it the opposite. And so agnosis is the lack of knowledge, which was what I was for a while, as agnostic, because I believed that I couldn't know anything. Gnosis. now I'm a Christian, born again, baby. Let's go. Because I believe that you can use knowledge to pursue truth and to understand life and its meaning and its purpose for us as humans here. Gnosis represents knowledge and the pursuit of knowledge as the base of all things. And so Freemasonry and other related Judeo-Christian cults actually come up, and even deism. Sometimes you'll hear people describe the original founding fathers as being deists. Yeah, that's Joshy. Hey Josh, come up to the front. How do you sit at a spot with an apple? Okay. So they'll describe the original founding fathers as being deists as well. But Gnosticism, if you dig deeper into it, is truly the root religion there. And so with Adam and Eve taking from this fruit, Masons look back to this event and say, this is where Lucifer, who is the fallen angel, right, originally was empowered and originally was trying to encourage humanity to gain wisdom and knowledge as that which the God, or as that which our Abrahamic God has. And so Masons and those who believe in Gnosticism, as much as I disagree with this stance, believe that it was a good thing for them to eat of the fruit and to pursue in that and to take to want to be like God. And this is where Luciferian tradition says it's actually not about worshiping Satan, it's actually about worshiping yourself. Whereas in Christianity, we worship Christ and we deny ourselves. And so it's the opposite, right? And so Apple, for example, I believe their first Macintosh, they sold for $666 when they first sold it as like this joke thing, but the symbolism is true. But that's, I think, part of the reasons why they have the bite out of that apple to represent that this is the root of all knowledge, and that we decided as humanity to go down that path of wanting knowledge and be like gods ourselves. Which, when in your Apple device or phone or whatever, that's what you literally have access to today. This is another take on that. In Dutch, the word for Satan is Lucifer, Lucifer, and that's the same word we use to call a matchbox. When we light a candle, hey, pak je met lucifers. Because its origins of the Latin is lux, right? Luci, as the year anno lucis, and fere is the infinitive word for to bring. And so the shortened version of that grammar of fere is fair, is bringer. And so Lucifer represents the one who brings light. Of course, we as Christians believe that it's an artificial light that is just merely flickering for us to be attracted to. And all that shines isn't always good. And so that's some of the root of where understanding the devil or Lucifer as a shining object for the Masons and all these traditions comes into play. Here is some of the genealogy as presented by viz.bible. There's far more science about this, to the point where we have an entire creation museum and Noah's Ark thing in Kentucky, I believe. whether you believe in evolution or microevolution or the 6,000 year idea is not of my concern very much. I'm not too concerned about that. For me, it's of larger importance who was at the start. Was it accident? Was it the Big Bang? Or was it something intentional? Was it God? Which I lean towards it being God. So they calculated it all out. That puts Abraham here. All this is in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. All those verses about Leviticus, like this person begets this person, and father lived this many years and begat son, in the patriarchal tradition that they did, it was very handy for passing down lineage and being able to write that down. Can you imagine if they wrote down the father and the mother and the son and the daughter of this? Like, it would be insane, and Leviticus would be like 3 or 4 times as big. Not that that's a bad thing that we should do and have record of, though, of course. So they calculated this out based on those extremely long years that those individuals would have lived, which we believe to be true, however you might define that. Also, side note, creation was 6 days, right? And then on the 7th, God was resting. There's a verse that says that 1 day is as 1,000 years. Some people believe that because 1 day is 1,000 years, you have 6 days, that makes 6,000 years. What are we coming up to right now from 4,000? About 6,000 years. And then after that, God rested. I don't know what that means. For us, that implies the peace that we've been experiencing for the past 50, 60, 70 years. But take that as a side nugget of that verse. Some people will take that very literally. So, Father Abraham, many sons. The reason, partially, that we still have the conflict today between the Jews, or the people of Israel, and Palestine is because of Genesis 21 and Genesis, I think it's a little bit further down, 26 or something like that. Who here knows what happened with Hagar and then Isaac and Jacob? I need to know, what is this like speaking to the crowd, and you already know, and what is this like actually adding new information? But in Genesis 21 is the story of Abraham, who was very, very old, not as old as some of those other guys, but he's very, very old, and his wife was Sarah. Right? In Dutch culture, actually, when someone turns 50, we put up a big sign of an Abraham or a woman of Sarah at 50 to celebrate how this person is now officially old. Once you hit 50, you become an Abraham, and people will dress up on the streets as that. That's how much Judeo-Christian culture is embedded in those Western European cultures. In Genesis 21, it says, I will make the son of the slave, Hagar, into a nation also, because he is your offspring. And this is God saying that to Abraham. And it says, now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore. When his son Isaac was 8 years old, right, this is skipping over Ishmael, who had already been born to Hagar, was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Right, so the important thing to take away from this is Ishmael was the firstborn, but Abraham and Sarah decided to go the cheap route. They decided to get Sarah pregnant or have offspring for God's blessing, even though Sarah wasn't able to get pregnant at that time. So they had the slave, Hagar, get pregnant instead and say, you know what, we're going to still go bypass God's blessing and have a firstborn child, which was Ishmael. Precursor to this, it's going to come back, this theme of the firstborn not being born the quote-unquote biological right way, but the secondborn stealing the blessing. Stealing might not be the right word here, but Jews would argue that it was meant for that person. So then, here we have genealogy, again, from Adam and Eve, all the way down. And here we have Abraham, or as in, this was done by actually a Muslim website. So in the Muslim tradition, it's called Ibrahim in Arabic. Ibrahim, Ishmael, Ishmael, and then Ishak, or Isaac, was the second born, and then Madian, and there's other studies there. But Ismail is a precursor, if you follow it all the way down, to Muhammad. Right? This is some of where they take their pride, is that the lineage for the original blessing of the firstborn of Abraham was coming ultimately to Muhammad. Welcome. Come take a seat. For the Jewish tradition, we follow it back to Isaac, right? And that's what those verses talk about, is that you will have a nation also because he is your offspring. So this is God saying, regardless of the firstborn, you will also have a nation. Both of y'all will have a nation. Then, the secondborn, Genesis 25, verse 23. 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. Ooh, wow. The older will serve the younger. The older in this case being the firstborn, the Palestinian connection, and the younger being Israel. This is the story with Jacob, who gets the birthright instead of Esau, right? And so the father in this case is Isaac, because we're following the Jewish lineage down. We go here. Isaac, Yaqub for the Muslims, Jacob. Notice this is, I think, Esau, but they don't even. Yeah, there's a lineage here, but it kind of Job apparently is a descendant of Esau. Which, there you go. Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Aaron, all these Christian figures that we, within our Christian Jewish narrative of these stories we think of, we don't as often talk about Job and obviously Muhammad and other prophets in this. But the ones that we talk about within our narratives, within our churches, are the ones that are the Jewish ancestors to this story who we believe received the blessing. So 2 nations, and the mother helps Jacob put on the fake skin of the animal to go to his father Isaac and say, "Hey, I am your firstborn son," tricking him into believing that he is the first one who deserves the birthright. And now we have the same situation as the previous father who tricked the birthright in going towards the secondborn instead of the first. Not the most healthy way to start an entire religion for the entire planet. So now we're at about 2000 BC, and that puts that in context there. And so in 300 BC, which is 1700 years later, they write about those events, which I'm assuming were told orally over those years before they were written down at some point and then passed down people by people. Jesus' birth, not too disputed among scholars these days. Some people will still be like, no, Jesus was never born, it never existed. Yeah, there's more evidence for Jesus' existence than there is for Shakespeare, and generally everyone believes that Shakespeare existed. So I'm not going to dispute that with anyone. Rome, the Roman Empire, as we know, the Jews during the time of Jesus were ruled by the Romans. Their empire, like Jesus was alive on our planet during one of the largest empires ever. There's always going to be a largest though. Like, okay, is it Britain? Is it China? Is it the U.S.? We could talk about that forever. Why Rome? Why the Roman Empire? But that's not as significant per se. You could talk about it being part of the spread. The Roman Empire, believe it or not, with all its, a lot of Romans' visual imagery and gods even comes from the Greeks. But it ended up becoming Christian. Nero famously blames the fires that were faked and started in Rome on the Christians as a specific attack. We see the same kind of tactics happen all the time. You can decide which ones in our modern day are those events that get intentionally started just to blame on someone. I might cite the Second Amendment on that one. Under Vice Emperor Constantine, Rome starts adopting Christianity, the high rho symbol, and the in hoc signo symbol, which kind of relates to this image, were part of this. He was the son of his father, obviously, and his father was very much against Christians and persecuted them. But this guy was son, he was a little more with the times, shall we say, and understood some of the Christian lingo a little bit better than the precursors, and said, this is actually a really, really good thing. And so he's the one, when they went to the battle here in Rome, you can still go to that bridge today, where this famous battle happened that basically brought Christianity to the entire Roman Empire. They claim to have seen the symbol in the skies that was a Christian symbol, in hoc signo vicenes, or vinces, which is Latin for in this sign you will conquer, or in this sign you will conquer, which is why in certain places if you say IHS, let's see, let's do one of these. Something.
Yeah,
IHS, in hoc signo, and then sometimes there's a V. That represents the Constantinian sign that he believes God sent. And then they had them put the chi rho, which is 2 Greek letters. So this is the Latin and this is the Greek. I know Brian already knows this. The chi rho is the first 2 letters in Greek of Christ's name, Christos, which is not even really, his name just means Messiah. We know Christ's name more as the Jewish, which would be Yeshua, which is what the English equivalent would be Joshua, even though Jesus is just a Greekified version of Christ's name. And it would be spelled, I believe, something like this. Both of these are sigmas, both of these are S's, but the sigma at the end of the word is written like this. And anytime a sigma is at the beginning or middle of a word, it is written like that in Greek. Just so it's kind of confusing, but why 2 S's? That's just what they decided. And yeah, this is an I, or the iota, or the eta, I believe, or no, I forget what it is. Eta, and then the upsilon. So it's Jesus, which is the Greek version that they derived to Jesus. From Yeshua. Jesus, and then we made it Jesus. So our version is really kind of derived a couple evolutions down. This is interesting. These are by 200 AD, all the green, which I'm sure a lot of those missionary journeys that we read about with Paul and others are related to these churches in Colossae, Ephesus, Philippi, Thessalonica, Corinth, the Church of Corinth. Those are the areas that we're starting to have this Christian kind of revival take place. And then finally, as that is already happening, as these revivals are already taking place, then Theodosius proclaims Rome as being officially Christian, and the battle at the bridge related to that. So there's a timeline. Now, shortly after this, so again, we have the rise of the Roman Empire, which now becomes Christian all across Europe and even in around the Mediterranean. The response to that, and then later, is once these texts become famous and everyone understands them, 300 years later, now there are scholars in the Middle East. Again, this whole thing spreads that come to learn about the Scripture. And Prophet Muhammad understands some of the genealogy, some of the history. Again, he's a descendant, so that knowledge probably gets transferred down. Hey, we are the descendant of this and this guy, Ishmael. Between 609 and 632 dictates the Quran. I don't want to cause any offense towards Islam, but this is some of the verses that might call people to see some of the inherent enmity against the Jews as it was written in the Quran during the 600s. So in the Quran, it's a surah instead of a chapter. And so Surah 5, verse 64 from a scholar named Yusuf Ali. Amongst them, we, Allah, have placed enmity and hatred until the day of judgment. Every time they kindle the fire of war, Allah extinguishes it. But they being the Jews, but they ever strive to do mischief on earth, and Allah loveth not those who do mischief. Right? This is just one of a couple of these types of verses, but you can already see some of these former historical family struggles, shall we say, or battles between former tribes starting to boil up in some of these writings. Right? So then 600 AD we have the birth of Islam, and then shortly after that, as Islam and their empire grows, we have a response from the Christian side in Europe. And the Roman Catholic Church, which by the way now is in Rome, and we have the whole Vatican. I don't know when the Vatican was founded exactly, that would be interesting. The religious wars of the Holy Land underneath the Christian Latin Church, and they across all of Europe, they gather people together to go to the Holy Land and reclaim what they believe to be theirs, to believe to be Christian. This is an interesting slide. There are articles about the Crusades from a Muslim perspective that are vastly different, and apparently this is one of those battles that was won by the Muslim side. And here you see one of the knights giving up his sword or something like that. But most of the imagery we have seen, again, our history is written by the victors, is this praiseworthy thing from the Christian side. So that happens for almost literally 200 years of fighting and trying to reclaim what the European Christians thought to be theirs. This is a different timeline, but some of the other pieces, start of Crusades, the Knights Templar, which the Masons will put a lot of homage towards. The Order of Malta was started. Again, all these Christian cross-based pieces and orders and groups start being founded. The Jesuit order, here's the in hoc signo sign, right, pointing back to history. And then right before the birth of America, apparently the Jesuit order dissolved, even though it's still very much alive today. Even the school Loyola has Jesuit connections named after Loyola. These are some of those military orders that have been founded. Order of Malta, if you go to the nation of Malta, my father has been to the nation of Malta, and he brought back one of those little souvenirs, this logo, a cross-based Maltese cross, I believe is what it's called, or eight-pointed cross, or star, eight-pointed star, whatever it is like their sign on their flag and everything. And so these symbols, these elements of this pseudo-Christian heritage that I believe got more obsessed with the treasure and the power and the historical artifacts from Christ's day and the scriptures and the finding of all that than with Christ's writings and how we should live our lives as human beings. That was what they obsessed over, and they learned to turn that into their own brand and groups and people to gather across this. This is one of these groups that might have sparked controversy in recent years, but I think a lot of people only know about it in meme terminology. It was started in Ingolstadt in Germany. This is a photograph or a painting or drawing of, again, you see the in hoc signo up in the corner. This is just an idea of the area around which it would have been started. I believe it was considered, when he was started, it's still under Roman Empire standings. By the time he died in Bavaria, it would have been the early decades of the German Reich, or German nation starting to form, although that took many, many, many more years. But Adam Weishaupt is accredited to being that. It's a order, just like many of these other orders, that got together in a slightly secretive manner to discuss things that brought them together, that involved Judeo-Christian roots and secrets and treasure and brotherly love and charity, all this kind of stuff. So that brings us to one of the biggest kept secrets of the United States, Freemasonry. Now, I think a lot of you already know what this symbol stands for. Who doesn't understand the meaning of these pieces? All right, okay, about half. That's good. That's important for us to know. The G symbol is defined as standing for God, or the grand architect of the universe. My friend here had a keychain at one point that had that, and I was like, because he's an architect, I was like, oh, dang, grand architect, interesting. That God, however, has Judeo-Christian origins, but it's not the God that you and I worship. It's a different God that is actually a synchronized God, brought of three different deities together, although I would generally call it Lucifer. Because it's very, it's got very demonic undertones. But it's not our Judeo-Christian God. That's the main point I want to make. When you draw something with a square, what shape does it make?
A square.
A square. Genius. I'd be curious to know what the etymology of the word square is and where that comes from. When you draw something with a compass, which is what this is, a compass, what does that make? Circle. So we have the, we have the square and we have the circle. This shape here represents the finite, and it has edges to it, it has boundaries, right? The circle has always represented the infinite, the perfect, right? The ring is the everlasting. So this is the divine, and this is the finite, this is the human. And so they put the G symbol, very kind of funnily, symbolically, in between the finite and the infinite, in the middle, as a crossover, as we here on earth have the experience of the finite, yet we can somehow interact with the divine. There are also other symbols that relate to far many other things, including the apron, which I just discovered the other day, apparently is a reference back to Adam and Eve wearing fig leaves to cover themselves up. Because now they were in knowledge of their nakedness and ashamed, but they covered themselves up. And so the apron is actually a reference back symbolically to Adam and Eve's fig leaves. Again, the tool we use for all knowledge, I would love to study what the roots are of the word Google, why they just created that. It seems to me like a pseudo Wicca, witchcrafty, kind of like Google, like something you would say to summon something.
Actually, a Google is an infinite number.
A Google is an infinite number.
I can't remember. I can't remember.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's infinite.
Interesting. Well, anyways, they put it in that perfect circle now when they did the redesign of that logo, and we'll get into some more of the other Google pieces that are modern day hints, but they also very interestingly have their geometry within that letter, just to, I think, point back a little bit. Some of the oldest proof of Freemasonry is found mainly in the United Kingdom in the 1600s and 1700s. And funnily enough, if you travel around the UK or the Netherlands, I've been to a couple different synagogues, Jewish synagogues. They have a surprising amount of connections to Freemasonic lodges. I don't know exactly what that's all about. Sometimes I think they use the same space, the same temple spaces and altars to do rituals, and they just alternate different days. Yeah, these are some of the oldest pieces, and they're mainly found in the United Kingdom. Here are some of the symbols of the lodge, which the word lodge is not a common word in our everyday language, but you could literally just Google Maps even right now, closest lodge near me and find what those are. I think there's one in Carpentersville. Again, the Ville of Carpenters, I wonder if there's a connection there, right? Because they like bringing these pieces back to their local cities and governments. They put the arrangement of the temple hall has the Grand Master, the GM or whatever, at the top, and he's raised above three layers or steps to get to the top stage area, shall we call it, which is why I'm always kind of happy when I see churches that don't have 3 steps, because I'm like, good, that means they're not potentially practicing things here. Because those 3 steps represent the 3 degrees before you enter into being an actual Mason and you're part of the true brotherhood. That's like apprenticeship. That's your first initial degrees are called the Blue Lodge. And we have a couple books there that can detail that out. Both main lodge groups or denominations, shall we call it, if the main Christian ones are Catholic and Protestant, right, and everything goes from there.
Yeah.
The main Masonic ones are the Scottish Rite and the York Rite, right? So both of them, UK, Scotland, you can notice even that division. Scottish Rite, okay, so that probably had its roots in Scotland, and York Rite, England. So even though the UK was one unity, even in their religion, they wanted to keep those lodges separate, and they grew up separately. And the one lodge has, this one right here has the exact detailing. I'll just have it passed around, of the York Rite on the left, which has 13 degrees, and the Scottish Rite on the right has 33 degrees. And have you look at it, pass it around, and you can just look at some of the titles that they give it. It's rather interesting. Some of their symbols or their main taglines or phrases, their motto, are faith, hope, charity. Charity, you guys have heard of the Shriners Hospital. There's lots of these hospitals and things that they do advocate for and come together to bring lots of funds and money together that support research, hospitals, health, and yet I personally am slightly suspicious of how much of that money that goes to these major hospitals and Jesuit institutions even and so forth goes towards other places. Cancer research in and of itself, and AIDS, back in the day, AIDS and cancer felt like limitless buckets of money could just keep coming for cancer research and AIDS research, on and on and on. How much more research do we need? What if there already was a cure? Would that then solve it? Oh, what if, I would personally lean towards, if you keep them sick, you can keep money flowing. But that's just some of that. Faith, hope, and charity. These are kind of like generic Judeo-Christian words, but specifically if you go to someone's house, like I have, who used to be a Mason, notice that the word Christ, or Jesus Christ, just like in our Constitution, you will not find the word Jesus or Jesus Christ anywhere, because even in their rituals and in their meetings, they have a Masonic Bible. It literally says Holy Bible on the side. But Jesus and Jesus Christ has been removed out of their translations of it, because they want to keep religion, politics, and a couple other things out of their meetings, but yet it specifically removes the whole point of why the Bible exists in the first place. It's the Old Testament to point to Jesus, and then the New Testament to reveal Jesus in his own words and beyond. And so you go to someone's house, you will probably not find verses quoted on the walls and so forth that mention Jesus Christ, the Messiah. You'll see the Lord. You'll see the Lord is good unto this house, or the Lord has blessed us, yada, yada, yada. And I've seen this personally in 1 or 2 people's homes that I knew had Masonic connections, and yet didn't weren't extremely open about it, and I started looking around the house, and I was like, huh, interesting. It said a lot of faith, charity,
But like Lord even as well.
Lord as well. Yeah. So they'll acknowledge Lord, but it kind of accommodates to the mainstream Christians out there who also believe in the Lord.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I love the Lord. I love the Lord. Okay, which Lord are we talking about? This is an interesting little old snippet here that talks a little bit about some of the ritualistic stuff. It says, it's a little song. The cabinet sings, "The world is in pain, our secrets to gain, but still let them wonder and gaze on. They ne'er can divine a word or a sign of a free and accepted Mason. It is this and it is that, they cannot tell what, nor why the great men of the nation should put aprons on and make themselves one with the free and accepted Mason." Interesting little song that they would chant together or something, I don't know. So, we have this interesting period of, after fighting, the Christians taking kind of a dominant stage across Europe and even into the New World, right? As these colonies expand out into Africa and into Central, South, and North America. We have the birth of the United States of America separating itself from the UK. Here is that Bible I was mentioning. That's a Masonic Bible. Notice they have the square and the compass sitting on top. Just like the Jews use, I forget what it's called. Is it a scepter? Or I forget the pointing hand that they use to read the holy words in the Torah. They have, I don't know if they use it to read or whatever, but they have their own instruments that are derived. Notice here also the checkerboard floor, which is part of why I brought this out, and that's what this previous slide refers to, is that when they bring a new apprentice into the room of Masons, and all the other men are sitting around, that new apprentice is at one point blindfolded. There's a whole series of ceremonies that book and some of these other books talk about in a deeper length that are kind of disturbing at one point. But he's blindfolded symbolically, which is why you'll see this in a lot of music videos where they intentionally remove someone's sight and then they give them the sight back to imply that his eyes have now seen the light, that he is now able to understand all things and start working his way up as an apprentice Mason within the lodge. And then he goes through those degrees. And the tricky thing about this is that you don't know what you're signing up for until you're in it.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, just like you and I, who maybe get grandfathered into it, maybe it's a father, an uncle, says, hey, let's go to this meeting, let's go to this thing. My uncle personally, he at one point told me he was, as a teenager, at the Demolay. It's a group, the Knights of Demolay is a boys' fraternity. There's also girls' sororities. These groups that are in elementary school, that are at churches and other places, that at young ages start getting young people involved in Masonic, pseudo-Masonic traditions and rituals so that they're ready by the time they go to college and they pick a college. And all the colleges have fraternities and sororities. Now you're part of it, you already understand, we do these funny rituals, we get blindfolded, we do some oath kind of thing to the lodge, whatever. Now, when they're adults, easy picking, and we can find which ones are the star students, and we can bring them on board into our fraternity. Sorry, it's a lot. So again, here's the Constitution, and 1776. I personally, I don't know full evidence on this, but the original 13 colonies, right, 13 states, I wonder if that number was an intentional choice that they wanted to have 13, which is kind of a pseudo-Christian, anti-Christian jab at the 12 disciples. But who was the 13th disciple? Judas, right? So he kind of, within Satanism, he kind of became, that number kind of became famous. I'm curious how much, even today, with our new current flag, we have the 13 stripes. So here was 13, double 13. I don't know whether that was intentional or not, some of this is kind of like, they leave it a mystery for the future, right? They kind of leave it hidden in plain sight, but we don't know. And they kind of do that intentionally. Here's the new flag. Here is kind of as you're going into the late 1700s and 1800s, people are starting their own lodges across America. Missouri, Oklahoma.
Judas was actually one of the 12, actually.
Right, one of the 12, but
Yeah.
then he got replaced.
They took
Oh.
him out. They replaced him.
Yeah,
after
okay,
he
so then he
replaced
became the
Jesus.
13th.
So then they
Awesome.
kind of see him as 13.
Nice.
Yeah. Also, of course, where the inverted cross comes from with Peter hanging himself. Or not hanging himself, but be killed. Sorry, Judas is the one who hung himself. Here we have the pillars, and all these pieces come back to biblical stories. Again, they don't call themselves a religion, but they are a religion. They pull from mainly the Old Testament for their symbolism, and in particular King Solomon. And with the Crusades, all those Europeans going out to Israel, they were there to raid ultimately Solomon's temple and steal whatever was inside and take it back. And I don't know if they put it in the Vatican in some spot there or whatever. But these are the pillars of Joachim and Boaz, which is again a biblical thing that the Bible specifically mentions 2 pillars at the front of the temple, one representing the male and the sun, and the other representing the female, the feminine, and the moon. Okay, and so this is where other symbolism of the polarities come to play, even to a certain extent with the scroll. Where's the Torah? Almost there. There we go, here. The Torah, even, I'm not sure how much this is a true symbolism, is a storyline that you're following between 2 pillars. And so the whole storyline is that in between the 2 pillars, sorry, I even forgot to mention about the checkerboard, when that apprentice shows up on that lodge floor, they will dance, or not dance, but be led across step after step after step across the edge of the perimeter of that floor, to symbolize that this is the journey of life. And yet it is between polarities of life and death, good and bad, and that's what the black and white represents. And so, as you enter between it, you see in architecture, you see lots of temples and formal buildings that have these big giant columns on either side with ornate decorations. One of them might represent the feminine side, and the other might represent the masculine side. As you enter into that door between those 2 pillars, which is what I think even the Twin Towers relates to a little bit, you are entering into the journey between the masculine and the feminine. Again, it comes back to between the divine and the finite, sort of a symbolism. Here they even read the journey of the Jews on the pages between the 2 pillars. Yeah. So now we get to the birth of America, right? The Statue of Liberty was donated by the French. It's the French flag. And it was here. A supposed gift of the French to commemorate the Franco-American Union. Notice the French also based their declaration of independence, what's it called?
It's like their liberation. It was the French Revolution.
Their constitution. Their constitution on the American one, right? There's this strong connection between the French and the Americans, especially after the Americans just defeated and wanted to separate from the British. Who also didn't like the British, the French. I noticed an intense effort on the part of the Masons to raise funds for its restoration. In checking further, I discovered that its sculptor was the French Freemason, Frederick A. Bartholdi. It was financed through Masonic efforts and dedicated by the Paris Lodge, Sac-Laurent, Bartholdi's home lodge, a gift from the French Masons to their American brothers. It was received and its cornerstone laid on August 5th of 1884 by the Grand Lodge of New York, which lodge also recently rededicated the restored Lady of the Harbor. A curious piece of the Masonic conspiracy puzzle in the founding of America is the actual street layout of Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
So you guys know about this one as well, right? The Novus Ordo Seclorum, or the New World Order, or the new way of order for the world. And at the bottom that represents 1776. If you add it up, I believe there's 13 layers of bricks representing the 13 founding colonies or whatever, and so forth. The all-seeing eye that also represents the G symbol God at the same time, which has Egyptian connections to the occult. Yeah. Again, any God we trust? Yeah, sure. What God are we talking about here? Washington, D.C. This book, Washington, D.C. did not formerly exist. Here, feel free to pass around this book as you go. Pass it backwards. They decided where to plant the capital. Who knows where the former capital of the United States was before Washington, D.C.?
Oh my goodness.
I personally don't know exactly. I thought it was either Pittsburgh or Philadelphia.
Yeah, Philadelphia, maybe.
Philadelphia sounds
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, the word Philadelphia
Brotherly love.
is the city of brotherly love.
Oh,
Oh, the Masons
nice.
love it, man. They're like, yes.
I think this is all coming
Which, if y'all ever seen National Treasure, have you watched National Treasure? Oh, rewatch that thing now with this lens on,
Oh my
and
god.
you'll be like, oh, dang, they're really trying. Constitution, they love celebrating the Constitution and the founding fathers, da 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 da, which I don't entirely dismay, but just take what you know with it to look at this under new eyes. If you look on your phone on Google Maps, the city of DC, I'm not sure if they included this as well, but at least this portion on the Maryland side is based on a diamond, right? As is above, so is below. It's the G symbol, the compass, and the square. And so they made it perfectly square, and then put the beautiful downtown city right there on the river, after it was formerly, I believe, in Philadelphia. And so they decided, they handpicked it themselves for this location. The gentleman who was the architect and planner was, again, a Frenchman, Pierre Charles L'Enfant. And he, along with Jefferson and Washington, I believe, helped come up with the plan. In this book, there's a chapter at one point that mentions that there's lots of sacred geometry that wasn't entirely Masonic. Lots of places and cultures all around the world, including the Arabs and Chinese, and no matter who was studying math, they were coming up with these same ratios. They were coming up with the golden ratio and these mathematical equations that Pythagoras in Greece and all these people were also coming up with. And so some of it, he'll argue, is not necessarily connected. It's not. But if you study into what his role was and how the brothers of the founding fathers were guiding America slowly, you'll realize that this was truly intentional and not just some happenstance, oh, let's just do some cool geometry. They were in the Enlightenment era where they were like, we have principles, this is the new world, this is the new place. We're going to construct a city that is based on the principles and mathematical geometries that we've come across in old ancient times. And so the new order of ages was meant to, their capital city, be based on this sort of sacred geometry. If you look into it and you study it a little bit more, you realize that the streetscape of Washington, D.C. is built on this sort of mathematical system with the pentagram star at the top. The White House, I believe that is, or is that the Capitol?
That's the capital.
Okay, that's the Capitol, and then the White House is like one of those other ones.
Yeah, White House is above it.
Yeah, there's no way the White House would be on the National Mall like that.
Yeah, it's on north.
It's Abraham Lincoln over here,
Yeah.
and then you have the entire National Mall, and then the Capitol building right there. Of course, the Capitol, you see that owl shape? That's also what I would believe. The gardens are shaped in the shape of an owl to represent the all-seeing. The owl is known for what? Wisdom, and being able to look at all degrees. And so the owl is sitting at the top here of this design even. I believe even within that star, but I'd have to go into the specifics more, but this book really details it out in a very fascinating manner. When they founded Washington, D.C., and they built this new city from the ground up, George Washington was there at the ceremony in 1793 to help lay the Masonic ceremony of the cornerstone. The capital is in progression. The southeast is yet kept vacant, that the cornerstone is to be laid with the assistance of the Brotherhood on the 18th, I don't know what that is. Maybe that's a street. Those of the craft, however, dispersed are requested to join the work. The solemnity is expected to equal the occasion. So even in one of these detailed, beautiful doors, you'll see here in the top left, one of those pieces is George Washington with his gavel or with his, what is that, spade? That you can clear the mortar with and shape it around. A trout. Again, these trowel, sorry. Trout. Go fishing. They have this ceremony in which they want to imply that this initial cornerstone, this initial foundation piece that's going to set the foundation for the rest of this building and this structure is tried and true, that it is good, that it is found to be in good standing, and they have this whole ritual upon which they want to ensure, yes, the builders of this structure have indeed found it to be good. We can commence forward with the planning and building of our structure. They do this in symbolism as to the creation and building of our own lives. And they say, we ourselves, just like a building, just like a structure, are the masons of our own lives. And we must build ourselves spiritually to the extent that God has equipped us to be able to do so. And that's what all those degrees are for, is to get someone supposedly to level up into the purest form of humanity. This is our modern day equivalent of this exact occurrence. Just 5 years ago, in 2018, I so happened to be looking around on YouTube, and I saw from C-SPAN, the U.S. Capitol Cornerstone 225th anniversary. And I was like, you're bloody kidding me. This is ridiculous. This is insane. And so here you have none others than those that are truly ruling us and helping us move forward in the direction that America is meant to go. Richard Bautista, Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia, Grand Master. And you can tell nowadays it's a mix of people. It's not just white dudes. He's Latino. We've got our African-American brother over here. It's a whole range of things. And we'll get into some of that diversity more in a second. But they were celebrating and rededicating on the 225th anniversary since 1793 from the original presentation. You'll notice here the aprons. His is all decorative. Remember what a mayor of a town wears. He wears that same kind of a piece, or a necklace piece around his neck, and that helps distinguish him as separate from the crowd. Going back to the diversity piece, I am coming to strongly believe that the emancipation and civil rights movement for African American individuals in America is strongly connected to Black people being able to practice Freemasonry. Meaning, once white people were okay with Blacks starting their own lodge on the East Coast, then they had started realizing, you know what, yes, they can also practice in the craft of Freemasonry. Now, you know what, maybe we should start considering seeing them as humans and not just 3/5. So, Prince Hall was on Google calls it an American abolitionist. Yeah, but mainly, I would say a Freemason. A leader in the free Black community in Boston. He founded Prince Hall Freemasonry and lobbied for education rights for African American children. He was also active in the Back to Africa movement. I don't know what that is, but that sounds interesting too. Notice, born in Barbados, died in Boston, Massachusetts. Prince Hall is the branch of Let that sit in. When I first discovered that, I was like, "You're bloody kidding me." That's how deep this thing is in our culture, in our country. These are the was it Scottish Rite or York Rite on the right? That was a 30.
That's
York is-
Scottish Rite here. Scottish Rite. 33, and then the 13. Right? Remember that 13 number? The York Rite on the right. And each of them, for some whatever reason, have their own ways of going up the ladder. Here are the first 3 steps, right, of the Blue Lodge. So this fellow of the craft, I believe, master mason is the 3rd degree, and then once you go past that, now you can go into some of these others. But I believe that it's unison for both Scottish and York Rite that you can go into. Don't do it though. Again, here the pillars on either side. This one is interesting. Is more of a Muslim take on the craft. So
Like Shriner?
the Shriners, yes. And there's a bunch of different weird ones. Regardless of what it is, they mainly want people who want to be members to be of monotheistic beliefs. So if someone's a Hindu and they believe in poly gods, they would probably ask that person would just believe in one god before entering, even though the one that they worship is also kind of this. It's called Jabulan, and it's a collective of 3 different gods, including Baal and all these other ones. But Moloch, yeah, something like that. This is again Prince Hall. Martin Luther King Jr. Fascinating. He never was a Mason, but the Masons wanted to get him in and wanted to make sure he was one of them. In this article, they said that they wanted to call him a Mason at sight, which is a non-Freemason raised to the degree of Master Mason through the authority of a Grand Master, who says simply, you know what, boom, this person is a Mason. So they wanted his title, his status, everything that he did to be part of one of which, for all the centuries to come, they could say, yes, he was a Mason. But he wasn't. The news of King's alleged appointment to Master Mason after death caused controversy in the Masonic world, primarily because a dead person is not able to exercise one of the primary tenets of Freemasonry, which is joining of one's own free will. To become a Freemason, aspirants typically must go through a process by which they attain the first 3 degrees of Freemasonry. First, candidates are initiated and are known as entered apprentices. During this stage, they learn some of the secrets of Freemasonry, and upon completion are entitled to be called a brother. So, this is him speaking at a local Prince Hall gathering as Reverend Dr. King. So he spoke to them and was able to be within those circles, but he never was a Mason. Muhammad Ali, however, famous figure, he was part of something called the Nation of Islam, NOI, and then later started his own chain, started his own direction, his own religion, basically, called the Fruit of Islam, FOI. And this is him seen as at one of his gatherings. Go ahead. Sorry, there's a lot going on. Just alone within each state, when I lived in Montana, I was like, there's literally only 1 million people that live in this state. I can't believe that Masonry really made its foothold here in this state. Oh, guess what? This is a map of all the Freemasonic lodges in Montana. There's a lot. If you find a church in any town, there's probably a lodge in that town or a town right next to it that matches that. Sometimes even churches offer these services towards their teenagers in groups. You call it women's auxiliary, even if it's to a certain degree, I would argue YMCA, YWCA.
Is Rotary Club also?
Rotary Club has Masonic ties,
Okay.
Lions Club, you name it. A lot of these groups have these fraternal, especially if it's military, Navy, Army, any of the Marines, any of the groups that went off to fight in the Second World War, when they came back to the US, they wanted a place to still have that oath and brotherhood together with their boys. And so that's where they created these VFW gathering places, lodges, Elks Lodge down the street here, yada, yada, yada. here's another family tree with all that stuff. I'm not going to bore you with it too much. Ladies' organizations. Wow, they left a couple for the ladies. Look at that.
I'm so happy.
Order of the Eastern Star, Ladies of the Shrine, whatever. Goes on. Mormonism. I won't get into any other crazy. Believe it or not, this is the shrunken down version. I won't go into crazy other Judeo-Christian occults or beliefs. But Mormonism, I want to mention real quick, has some of. I think it's Joseph. What is his name originally?
Smith.
Joseph Smith. Originally went to a lodge, I believe, in Ohio. And in the founding documents, I have a Book of Mormon right here. That y'all could again pass around if you want. I took this from, Marriott Hotels. It's a Mormon-owned business. Don't go there. But if you do, steal one of these from their little thing. Right next to the Book of Bible of Gideon is one of these. In Ether, chapter 8, verse 14, you'll notice some distinct Masonic kind of language. And it came to pass, and it came to pass that they all swear unto him by the God of heaven, and also by the heavens, and also by the earth, and by their heads, that whoso should vary from the assistance which Achish desired should lose his head, and whoso should divulge whatsoever thing Achish made known unto them, the same should lose his life. So some of these Masonic rituals and beliefs are bleeding into other Judeo-Christian cults that we find ourselves interacting with today. Again, this tree just keeps spreading. This is kind of just plucked off of the internet. But the Bilderberg Group, Rothschilds, the oil magnates of America, Rockefellers, the UN. This one I looked up the other day, oikumene. This is a joint gathering of the churches of the world under one branch. And they want to basically slowly bring out the Zionistic Judeo-Christian narrative into the world, but have it done so uniformly under one group.
What about is this communists and also like anarchists?
I was looking at this the other day. Some of this is which one?
Batman.
The Batman Club.
I don't know what some of these are, honestly, but I can imagine there being branches of this within communist realms as well. Yeah. UNESCO. This is a quick video, so you don't need to hear me talking, of Prince Charles becoming prince.
Who was fulfilling a promise and giving Wales a worthy prince for its own, in a manner set down centuries ago.
There's a degree of searching for his own identity and trying to escape from the preordained formats.
I, Charles, Prince of Wales, do become your liege man of life and limb.
Your liege man of life and limb. The tradition of having a monarchy, having this power that represents the King Solomon, goes again back to the Bible. The idea of a king and a queen, my country, the Netherlands, has a king and a queen now. US, when they founded it, doesn't have that. Because they were like, we won't need that, we'll replace that fake power puppet figure with a president, and it's going to seem way more democratic, because everyone in the past kind of hates the queen and the king Henry, King Charles, and Queen Elizabeth, yada, yada, yada. But the reason why they do this, in the way, there's a whole bunch of different reasons, but to me, one, it represents a Masonic reference back to King Solomon and that kingdom that they want to create here on earth in reclaiming Israel and fulfilling the Bible through Revelation, right? And the rebuilding of the third temple to fulfill Revelation and Daniel. But also, if you have people wearing this kind of stuff with all the wealth, and it's just bloodline related, just like the Bible was bloodline, then we as normal peasant humans see that and say internally, they are the ones who have authority over us. They are the ones who have power over us, even though they're just humans. They're just like you and me, simple, plain humans. But because of all the cultural symbols that they drench this in, and the wording, and the Lord of Life and Limb, or Duke of Wells, and Duke of this, and Lady of the whatever shrine, they make us as regular humans, even with people adding letters to the back of their name, and they add more letters and more letters. Doctor, degree, master's degree. These are Masonic lingo pieces that help place authority and hierarchy within society. And so it helps to rule the young sheep to have people who look the part of the authoritarian figures. So again, here's the beautiful royal family tree and how that's all playing out. And oh boy, you can imagine the amount of fraternal Masonic gatherings and groups that they're all part of. But that's just a pure clip there about the king, right? So now we have the birth of America, right? And this new country in which we can finally novo ordo seclorum build up the values that the Bible has foretold and predicted. This country is the one that's going to help fulfill them in Israel. World War II and World War I, again, not surprisingly, World War II was all about which people group?
The Jews.
Yes. Yeah, the Jews, right? But the Nazis was the people who executed them.
Yes.
Um,
Focus on it.
Fascinating. I would like to study more about why Hitler specifically was obsessed with the Jews. Of course, there were other minority groups of people who sadly were also killed. But by the time World War II had ended, millions of people had perished, 6, 7 million. Everyone who was different, everyone who spoke up, had been murdered. The ultimate scapegoat, the Jewish people, had been sacrificed willingly and knowingly in order to take control of Israel. From that moment on, the Zionists took over. The Palestinian people who had lived in Israel since the beginning of time were subdued in yet another war. So, with Hitler, we know that he claimed that he was ridiculed at times for saying that they were Christian. Germans were Lutheran and Protestant, right? They invented the Protestant Reformation with Martin Luther originally in, I think, 1517, which is why 500 years later, in 2017, we had the 500-year celebration of the Reformation. But 1517, Reformation. Germans are Christian. They see themselves as Christian. So you imagine, why on earth would a Christian country help execute 6 to 7 million Jews? Hitler argued away the idea that Jesus was Jewish. They swept that under the table. People say, hey, whoa, we're following Jesus here. He's a Jew. And Hitler dismissed that and said that the Jews were the cause of the ones killing Jesus, right? Because it wasn't the Romans. They just simply did the dirty work. The Jews were the ones asking for it. And so Hitler was able to place a lot of blame within society on some of this ideology that local Christians had. Also, the way I'm talking today about Zionism, they're talking about the rich bankers, right? The rich Jewish bankers and all this kind of thing, and drummed that up to be highly anti-Semitic. But behind the scenes, I personally wonder how much of this fits in with a broader European Zionist agenda to ultimately, if the same way we did 9/11 and we had an excuse now to go invade the Middle East, if Hitler had, what if the Bible says there's a big diaspora of the Jews, right? And they're going to be scattered from their homeland to all across the world. They were in Europe. My hometown of Amsterdam we call Mokum because it is the city that is, in Hebrew it means home. And so the Jewish people, when we go to our soccer games in Ajax Amsterdam, sorry it's taking a little bit longer, we say, sometimes they chant Jews, 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 Yoda, 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 as a way to encourage our team, because that was how much the Jews were prevalent within the city of Amsterdam and within the Netherlands, which is why the Nazis targeted our country so much.
Interesting.
Okay? But once the Jews are scattered everywhere, what would be a socially acceptable reason to then all of a sudden bring them back to Israel? What on earth? Well, what if there was a mass tragedy that happened to them that brought them close to extinction, and that gave us culturally an excuse to then create their rightfully earned and deserved homeland in the Middle East? That is how I would argue, and I would like to research it more at some point, but not too much because you'll go crazy. That is how I believe they then decided, right? Second World War ends with Allied forces defeating Germany, but in 1946, guess who shows up at the doorstep of Palestine to introduce a new country? It's all the forces that believe in these Masonic Zionistic values to bring a state of Israel. Right, this is the Jewish land, and there's some Jews that still live there back in the day. But this conversation is obviously very relevant today. Gaza, right, the Gaza Strip. And slowly over time, the Allied forces, so the United Kingdom, US, United Nations, which was also formed just after the end of the Second World War, EU later, and NATO, then brought about the formation of the State of Israel to then intentionally say, look, Second World War just happened, 6 million, 7 million Jews just got killed. Now's the time for a homeland.
So this is, see this? This is a map of all of the history of the expulsion of the Jews in Europe. They've been like, I have never seen a minority being kicked around this much, right? And of course, this comes back to the, the whole idea about the original sin, that you have betrayed Jesus Christ. The blood of Jesus is on your hand. And then comes the 11th century. At that time, Jewish people were not allowed to own land. They were just peasants. Even some of the professions they were not even allowed to participate in. But they were allowed to do one thing, usury, money lending, because it was prohibited by the Catholic Church to engage into that. So what happens when you work in money? You get richer, right? And those Jews lived in ghettos. Now, ghettos was not just like isolated neighborhoods in cities. Sometimes ghettos were outside the city. This is like how isolated they were. And in those ghettos, they have to pay gold to the mayor or the governor or the prince or the noble. So they would see, you're getting richer. I need more taxes. So they pay tax. What happens when you have a business and they increase your rent? You increase your service, increase the taxes. So what happened? The Christians started to default. And suddenly, the image of the greedy Jew was created. Shylock, merchant of Venice. If it will feed nothing else, it will feed my revenge. Like never did I see a creature so confront of a man. English. I messed it up. Anyways, but this was the image, greedy Jew, the greedy Jew. This was created because of their conditions, and it became worse in 1095. When Pope Urban II called for the first crusade to go and save the birth of Jesus from the unbelievers Muslim. And this crusade did not kill a single Muslim. You know how many people they killed? 2,000 Jews. Because it's like, wait, the non-believers are all over there. Why? So they went to it's called the Crusades of the Rhineland. So they went to the Jewish community because, hey, we own the money, so let's kill them better than paying them. And then came the plague. And then all of the things like, oh, they're killing babies, who would do that to a baby, And they accused them of poisoning the well. This was the kind of oppression that the Jewish people went through. Fast forward 19th century, there was like the Eastern Jew in Ukraine and Russia, and there was the Western Jews in Europe. Those people in the Eastern Jews had to immigrate because there were pogroms and they were like, kicked out. And at a certain point, the people in the West, especially in England, it's like, there are too many Jews. We need a solution. A solution for what? For the Jewish problem. So it's like we need to get rid of them. And you know what? Palestine was not even in the A list. Palestine was in the B list. Because England proposed 6,000 square miles in Uganda for the Jews, 1903. And the reason why Palestine was not on the list, that it was objected by a lot of rabbis that said, like, it's a promised land, but only when the Messiah comes. But there were other options: Argentina, South Africa, Uganda, Madagascar. And eventually, they said, all right, let's do Palestine. So they went to Palestine in 1914. There was 700,000 people living in Palestine. 3% were Jewish. 1917, Balfour Declaration. Arthur Balfour, he called the Jewish people in England that they are alien and hostile race. And the thing is, the only Jewish member of the parliament, of the English parliament, Lord Montenegro, he objected, said, like, these are British citizens, we should not kick them out. So they pushed them, but it was not going fast enough. Came the Nazis. And then it was not about the solution anymore. It was the end losing, the final solution by Hitler, because he needed an answer for the Jewish question, die Judefrage. And then, as you see, the Holocaust happened, the most orchestrated, industrialized, horrible genocide in our modern time. 6 million Jews died. So it accelerated, and they went. First of all, they left Eastern Europe, and they went to West Europe, and they went to America, and they were turned down, and they were pushed towards Palestine. So by 1948, right before the declaration of the State of Israel, there were 2 million people living there. Only 30% of them was Jews. So the whole idea of like a land without a people to a people without a land was a marketing thing. They were already Palestinians. So suddenly, from our perspective, the Jewish problem is not a Jewish problem, is not a Middle Eastern problem, is not an Arab problem, it is a European problem. It was pushed on us together with the guilt, because now we are the anti-Semite. Now we are the Jewish hater. And not just that, they took land. So people look at this like, why are we even, we had a lot of refugees coming in. And during that, there was a lot of, as you know, Zionist militia, the Aragon, the Haganah, all of these people were killing Palestinians. The famous massacre of Deir Yassin. You're talking about the atrocities of October 7th, it's horrible. But in the Arab mind, there is Deir Yassin, where there is an incredible movie called Tantoura, Tantoura, where the Israeli members of those militias, they talk about the atrocities that they did, including opening up the pregnant women's bellies and having bets if the boy inside is a boy or a girl. It is one of the most horrific, and they talk about it, some talk about with regret, and some talk about with pleasure. We did that, right? So you have even King David. I think your Prime Minister, Mr. Sunak, was there. And if I was British, I would question this. Because as you know, King David was bombed by the Aragon militias. 91 British soldiers died. I don't know, if I was British, how come my Prime Minister would have the nerve to stay in that hotel? I mean, you know, the ghost of the 91 British soldiers, that must be haunting for them, you see? So when you see all of that, and you see that suddenly, overnight, 1948, there were 1.5 million Palestinians, half of them, 3/4 of them were overnight pushed into refugees. Yeah. And this is why it's called the Nakba, the catastrophe. So now we have all of this building up into the minds. And suddenly this was like a conflict, a hate, a problem that we didn't have to do anything with. This was basically pushed on us by the Europeans. You see? So this is why it is important to say that. And I'm not saying that just like, oh, let's wipe out the State of Israel, let's like push them in the sea. No, but it's important when you talk about the conflict, that you talk about the root causes, right? No, there was like a vibrant Palestinian culture happening over there. And right now they are erasing this culture. Suddenly I'm thinking of like Israeli feta cheese, Israeli hummus. Oh, that's an insult. Israeli hummus. Come on. I mean, take the land, but leave the hummus, man. I mean, come on. I mean, that's not fair. You are someone who's always spoken against culture, cancel culture. Right now, a whole culture is canceled.
On a symbolic note, however, if we go ask who was, don't do this, who was the 33rd president of the United States? LMGFY, let me Google that for you. The 33rd president of the United States was Harry Truman. And Harry Truman was president of the United States, serving from 1945 to 1953. To me, it's kind of interesting on a symbolic level. Remember our degrees, the 13 and the 33? The 33rd president of the United States was the one who brought about the formation of the state of Israel in the homeland. So for them, the symbolism, they're just like chuckling, they're like, yes, this is perfect. Because number 33, he's reached peak masonry. Also, this guy is from Missouri, and this is him writing letters back to his lodge in Missouri. And there's a bunch of lodges in Missouri that are dedicated to Harry Truman. Some more garb thing of famous leaders, Karl Marx, Stalin, Napoleon, who had some of these,
Masonry?
Masonic, yeah, this is Masonic lingo. I'm not sure what branches Stalin and Marx would have been, but this is kind of the signs of the day that just help imply that power position. This is a piece that I'd like to research more myself too.
What the heck is with these?
But within academia, that is in Judeo-Christian institutions historically, because the Christians were the ones who helped build hospitals and build universities and build all these places of education. But we also brought the Masonic stuff into it, into our degrees, and to the robes, and to the meanings of the different linings, and yada, 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 yada. I even wonder, have you ever wondered why the heck is it a freaking square on top of that little cat? Okay, a square and then a circle. I don't know, but that's some stuff I'd like to research more. This is someone in a stonemason's guild or something that has the ecclesiastical gown, which is church, the master's gown, the city company gown, and the doctorate gown. And each of them have a certain meaning, velvet, lining, whatever, the shell. I honestly don't like it too much. Whatever, if it talks like, breathes like, smells like, it probably is. Even though a lot of us don't know that, so we don't use it that way. So 2017, here we're going to wrap up here soon. The oldest lodge, we saw a picture of it earlier, in London, the United Grand Lodge of England, or UGL, as they call it, UGL, had this big ceremony. Here is the Duke of Kent. I think it's Edwin or Charles or someone, about to go through this ceremony. The unveiling of these paving stones that are underneath there that help commemorate the 300 years since that first Grand Lodge in London was built and dedicated. Also, by the way, if you look at the floor plan of this whole thing, it is one big Masonic logo, the whole giant building. It's crazy.
They've only been around 300 years.
It's been around for 300 years. This was, again, in the MissouriIssue.com magazine, they were talking about one of their members, their probably Grand Master, went to London to be part of all the delegates in that giant hall to represent all the head masons of each of the lodges around the world, or around the Western world, to be there. And this is the Duke of Kent right there in the middle, who's high up in the ranks for the United Kingdom. Here, this is, if you look, Google Masonic Lodge near me, you'll find all these kinds of strange individuals and groups. And the weird thing is that it's people that you run into every single day. Me and Brian, we look at bumper stickers, I'll text it, I see another bumper sticker or some guy or some license plate. And now that you see this, you'll start seeing it in more and more places around you. And you notice what kind of car they drive? Oh my gosh, these are some nice, expensive cars. They're just driving up and down these streets, casually promoting their little free Masonic beliefs. Here's the Google piece, right? Gmail. Oh man. Oh,
No,
that's a killer.
wait. The right, is that Photoshop?
This?
Yeah.
No, this is real, my friend.
No.
Yes, look it up.
Get out.
This is in one of the particular branches of Freemasonry. This is their distinct type of apron that they wear. And we had it as a Gmail logo for a while. Even in the Flintstones, I was doing a casual design project the other day, and you know what? In the Flintstone, they have the Water Buffalo Lodge. Because back in the 1960s and 1970s, what were a lot of these men involved with? Well, if you look at some of the episodes with the lodge, the women in one of the episodes tried to fake being a guy so that they could get into the lodge. And they wear mustaches and all this. It's ridiculous. Also, there's some really weird sexual stuff. Snapchat recently did this thing for Phantom House they're promoting. Look at this imagery. What is that? Now that you know some of the Masonic symbolism. Okay, so we have the two columns or the two sidings, and then they don't have a black and white checkerboard, but they decided to make it a little more cool, a little more trendy. It's like this zebra pattern, black and white thing. Okay, it looks very dark. It looks very demonic, and it's got nothing but Masonic symbolism. And so, yeah, you know, Jay-Z, and you got all these artists and rappers and musicians out there that perpetuate the industry that is selling sex, drugs, and rock and roll to the people. In light of all this stuff, you have to be very careful with how you deal with these conversations around you. I was very daring in trying to find a former Freemason and interview him and put him out on the public, but there are lots of people that were really engaging with it, and there's so many people that need to hear these conversations, because if you're Caucasian descent in this country, you go back 1 or 2 generations, I pretty much 95% guarantee you go back a couple generations, you will find people who had Masonic connections at some point. Now, of course, the more you keep digging for something, the more likely you're going to find it. So don't dig so far that you lose your mind in this stuff. And then you have people reaching out to you with this Instagram stuff, and they're trying to get you to be a part of some Bitcoin Illuminati Brotherhood or something. It goes really weird. I block them all the time. I'm spamming. I'm like blocking them. But yeah, use. What is it?
The third post. What the heck?
It's like a family Christmas.
No, it's just some like
Pastor.
Christmas
pastor.
Yeah, man, it's some weird stuff. So here we go. Let's wrap this thing up. 2001 happened. 9/11. Okay, you can think of that whoever you want, but I believe it was an inside job, allowing us to go to the Middle East, right? And now we know everyone knows all the oil, Middle East. COVID, 2020, another major event that has divided the world, but I believe in Masonic tradition is allowing experimentation for massive population control, just like China already has its credit score rating system.
No.
This is a famous little segment from Kanye. I don't want to call it out too much because I feel like this is slightly dangerous, honestly. But in this thing that he was showing, he was talking about about Hollywood. How many have seen this thing before? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. So this is this is Kanye talking about who within the higher up positions within Hollywood were of Jewish connection or belief. And everything that's read in this Excel document was like Jewish names compared to the ones that were like, I don't know, Christian or other. So he's talking about how Zionism and Judaism within Hollywood, within America, has really, really taken over and trying to make the whole world aware of that in a rather striking, odd way, whatever you may think of him. I don't endorse anti-Semitism, obviously. People who are Jewish and practice Judaism is different from those who practice Zionism. And that's where I think we need to distinguish the difference between the two. However, it didn't start with gas chambers, right? Germany. It started with one party controlling the media, or in America. This is for America. One party controlling the message, one party deciding what is truth, one party censoring speech and silencing opposition, one party dividing citizens into us and them and calling on their supporters to harass them. It started when good people turned a blind eye and let it happen. And so what we notice today, more and more so, is a culture in which we're becoming highly divided, left and right. Are you pro-abortion? Are you anti? Are you pro this, anti that? To the point where I had a comment from a professor here at Judson the other day. He said, back in the day, we had 80% of people were in the middle, were in the center. And they had just decent understandings in the center. And then you had a couple outliers, 10% on the left and 10% on the right. They were kind of extremists. 80% was in the middle, just kind of, we have common ground understandings. Nowadays, we have like 40% on the right, 40% on the left, and like 20% maybe in the middle, barely. And that is what our culture is slowly, they're pushing us towards. Because if you have two opposing forces, that that sells. People will talk about it. Are you Coca-Cola or Pepsi? Josh, do you like Coke products better or Pepsi products?
Coca-Cola either.
Why? They're more popular. Interesting. Do you think a Coke tastes different from a Pepsi?
Yes.
Really? I would say you're being brainwashed. Because they really taste the same, and if you look at the ingredients, it's literally like 95% the exact same thing. Even for a Sprite compared to a ginger ale, if you look at the difference in ingredients, the only thing they add is a color and one flavor additive, and it's the same product. You're selling Sprite with 2 other E numbers, and that's it. It's genius because you sell tons of it, and it's super cheap to sell and make, and it's just a syrup, boom. Ginger ale, we have a whole new product, boom, done. So, oh, next time I'll vote Republican. Oh man, next time I'll vote Democrat, right? You'll constantly have people between two sides thinking, oh man, if only I would have done that. Oh, if only I would have voted this way. Well, you know what? At the end of the day, the agenda that's being pushed forward is going to be the same agenda no matter which color the ship is going towards Zionism, which is where we come to today.
Unfortunately, I think this is just the beginning. So I've learned when people tell you what they're going to do, don't ignore them. So when the UN and Bill Gates and Klaus Schwab tell you that they've got a UN 2030 plan with sustainable development goals, I think there are 17 or 21 of them, and every one of them says you won't be traveling, you won't have a private car, we won't be using international shipping to move goods around, there won't be any flights except military or perhaps very rich people. You won't own anything and you'll be happy. You probably won't live in your own house. You'll be using much less energy for everything, including heating, manufactured goods, and so on. When they tell you that, you should assume that they're serious about it. And so I think COVID has been part one of a multi-act play that's going to take 10 years that will destroy the liberal democracies completely. We've already, if you think living in a democracy, now ask yourself who you could vote for that would change this, because I don't think there's anyone you can vote for anywhere that is guaranteed things. So I don't have an answer, but I'm telling you, I think we're sliding down through the gates of hell. I'm speaking out. There's nothing in it for me. I've lost lots of money, all my friends. I'm away from my home and family, and I'm speaking out because, as I close, I am absolutely sure what I've told you is substantially true.
Israel, Palestine. All the countries in the West have been siding, publicly at least, with Israel. All the countries, Middle East, Muslim descent, again, goes back to our verses in Genesis about the two nations, have been siding with Palestine, free Palestine, right? The flag even of Israel, we call it the Star of David, is a Zionistic Masonic creation that was created when the state of Israel was born after the Second World War. People say it's the Star of David and has connections all the way back to David. I don't see that anywhere in the Bible. You show me where an inverted triangle and an upside triangle is. Sure, there might be like some Solomon's Temple kind of stuff, but it really is a Judaic, occultic kind of a symbol that then was introduced as the entire flag and symbol for Judaism at large. So, with all this being said, remember, knowledge is power, or knowledge from God is also power from God, right? It's not our own knowledge, it's not our own power. Remember the apple. We bit the fruit out of disobedience, and therefore what happened happened. And here we are living with the knowledge that we've been given, and I'm hopefully empowering you with it as well, to hopefully do wisely with it. Because, you have, knowledge truly is power, and once you know certain things, you know how to be able to operate in wisdom with that. So, to conclude, what are you going to do with your knowledge today? In this world, you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. The Bible describes earth being ruled by a devil, as we come together on Halloween to discuss this. But yet Christ has already overcome the world no matter what happens. Thank you for your precious time. This has been the Untold History of America.